For thousands of years, the rhythm of human life moved in quiet harmony with the limits of nature. A world where every action, every task, and every ambition was bound by forces that could not be hurried or scaled beyond their natural pace. The rising sun marked the beginning of labor, and its setting brought an unavoidable end. There were no switches to extend the day, no engines to multiply effort, only the steady, predictable cycle of light and darkness guiding the lives of millions. In this world, power was not something humanity controlled. It was something humanity borrowed. At the center of this existence was the human body itself, the most reliable and most limited source of energy available. Every field plowed, every structure raised, every tool crafted depended on the strength of hands and the endurance of muscles. A farmer's productivity was defined not by innovation, but by physical capacity and time. No matter how great the demand for food or goods, output could only increase if more people worked longer hours, and even then, the gains were modest. For the first time in history, we can begin to see how deeply constrained growth truly was. To extend beyond human limits, societies turned to animals. Horses, oxen, and donkeys became living engines, converting food into motion and strength. They pulled plows through dense soil, carried goods across uneven roads, and powered simple machines. Yet even this was a fragile solution. Animals required constant care, vast amounts of land for grazing, and rest to recover their strength. Their power, while greater than that of humans, remained finite and unpredictable. A harsh winter, a disease, or a poor harvest could weaken or wipe out this essential resource, bringing entire systems of production to a halt. Beyond muscle, humanity learned to harness the forces of nature itself. Rivers turned water wheels, wind filled the sails of ships and spun the blades of windmills. These were remarkable achievements, moments where ingenuity allowed natural energy to be captured and directed toward human needs. Water mills could grind grain faster than any human hand, and windmills could pump water or process raw materials with an efficiency that seemed transformative. But even these innovations came with limitations that could not be ignored. Water power depended entirely on geography. A mill could only exist where a river flowed with sufficient strength, and even then, its output fluctuated with the seasons. In times of drought, the wheel slowed or stopped entirely. In times of flood, it could be destroyed. Wind power was even less predictable. A calm day meant inactivity, while strong winds could damage the very structures designed to harness them. These systems, while powerful, lacked reliability. They did not operate on human schedules. They operated on nature's terms. Transportation revealed the same constraints. Goods moved slowly across land, carried by animals over rough, often muddy roads that turned impassable in poor weather. A journey that today might take hours could take days or even weeks. Trade existed, but it was limited in scale and speed. The cost of moving goods was so high that most production remained local. A merchant in one region sold what was made nearby, and the idea of large-scale, interconnected markets was still distant. For the first time in history, we can understand how isolation shaped economies, keeping them small, fragmented, and deeply dependent on local conditions. Inside homes and small workshops, production followed a similar pattern. Tools were simple extensions of the human hand: hammers, looms, spinning wheels, each requiring direct physical effort. A weaver could only produce as much cloth as their hands could manage, thread by thread, hour by hour. There were no shortcuts, no systems to dramatically increase output. Skill mattered, experience mattered, but even the most skilled artisan faced the same fundamental barrier. Time and energy could not be multiplied. This created a world where growth was slow and often uncertain. A bad harvest could lead to famine. A failed crop could destabilize entire communities, and there was little capacity to recover quickly. Surplus, when it existed, was limited. Most people lived close to subsistence, their lives shaped by forces beyond their control. For thousands of years, this was not seen as a problem to be solved, but as the natural order of existence. And yet, within these constraints, there was a quiet tension building. Demand for goods was slowly increasing, populations were gradually expanding, and trade networks, though limited, were beginning to stretch further than before. The old systems still functioned, but they were being pushed closer to their limits. The reliance on human, animal, and natural power had created a stable world, but it was a world that could not easily adapt to growing pressures. This was the moment before transformation, a time when everything appeared steady, even permanent, yet beneath the surface, the limitations were becoming impossible to ignore. Humanity had learned to work with nature, to adapt to its rhythms, but it had not yet learned to break free from them. Power remained external, unpredictable, and constrained, and every aspect of life reflected this reality. What makes this period so significant is not just what it was, but what it could not become. It was a world without acceleration, without exponential growth, without the ability to scale effort beyond natural limits. For the first time in history, we can see how every system, agriculture, industry, trade, daily life, was bound together by a single constraint. Energy was scarce, and it could not be controlled at will. This limitation defined humanity's relationship with the world, shaping not only economies and technologies, but also expectations. Progress existed, but it was gradual, almost imperceptible across generations. A person could live their entire life in a world nearly identical to that of their ancestors, with little sense that anything fundamental might change. The idea that power itself could be expanded, multiplied, and directed with precision was not yet part of human experience. And so, the pre-industrial world stood as a testament to balance and constraint, a system that had endured for millennia, but carried within it the seeds of its own transformation. The reliance on human strength, animal labor, and natural forces had built civilizations, but it had also set a ceiling on what those civilizations could achieve. It was a world defined by limits, waiting quietly, almost invisibly for the moment when those limits would finally be broken. There are moments in history that arrive quietly, without announcement or spectacle, yet they carry within them the force to reshape the entire trajectory of human civilization. In the middle of the 18th century, such a moment began to unfold, not through a single event, but through a series of subtle changes that, together, marked a profound turning point. For the first time in history, humanity began to move away from a world defined by muscle and motion toward one driven by mechanisms and momentum. It did not feel like a revolution at first. It felt like an adjustment, small improvements, practical solutions, but beneath the surface, something far more transformative was taking shape. For centuries, production had been deeply personal and localized. A craftsman understood every step of his work, from raw material to finished product. A weaver spun thread and worked it into cloth with practiced hands, each movement refined through years of experience. This system was stable, familiar, and deeply rooted in tradition. But it carried an inherent limitation. Output was tied directly to individual effort. No matter how skilled a worker became, there was a ceiling that could not be surpassed. Demand could grow, populations could expand, but production struggled to keep pace. By the 18th century, that pressure was becoming impossible to ignore. Markets were expanding, trade networks were stretching further, and the appetite for goods, especially textiles, was increasing at a rate the old systems could not sustain. For the first time in history, the gap between what people wanted and what could be produced began to widen in a meaningful way. This tension did not immediately lead to radical change, but it created the conditions where change became not only possible, but necessary. The earliest responses were not grand inventions, but targeted improvements tools designed to solve specific bottlenecks. A device that allowed a single motion to do the work of two, a mechanism that reduced the time required for a repetitive task. These innovations did not replace human labor entirely, but they began to enhance it. A weaver could now produce more cloth in the same amount of time. A spinner could create more thread without additional effort. At first glance, these seemed like simple efficiencies, but they carried a deeper implication. They suggested that productivity was no longer fixed. As these improvements accumulated, a pattern began to emerge. Each new tool created a ripple effect, increasing output in one area while exposing limitations in another. Faster weaving required more thread. Increased thread production demanded more raw materials. The system, once balanced, was becoming uneven, and this imbalance drove further innovation. For the first time in history, progress itself became a chain reaction, where each solution revealed a new problem to be solved. It was within this cycle that the true turning point began to take shape. Machines were no longer just assisting human labor. They were beginning to redefine it. Tasks that once required continuous physical effort could now be performed through controlled motion, powered by mechanisms that operated with consistency and precision. The role of the worker started to shift from direct producer to operator, from craftsman to overseer of a process. This change was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but its implications were enormous. What made this transformation so significant was not just the increase in output, but the change in how production was organized. Work began to move away from individual homes and small workshops towards centralized locations, where these new machines could be used more effectively. For the first time in history, production started to concentrate, bringing together labor, tools, and resources in a single place. This allowed for greater coordination, greater efficiency, and a level of scale that had never been possible before. The environment itself began to reflect this shift. The quiet rhythm of rural life, once defined by scattered cottages and small-scale production, started to give way to spaces designed for continuous activity. These were not yet the vast industrial complexes that would come later, but they represented a new way of thinking. Production was no longer something that happened wherever people lived. It was becoming something that happened where systems could be optimized. At the heart of this change was a new understanding of power. While earlier systems relied on human or animal strength, these emerging machines hinted at the possibility of something more consistent, more controllable. Motion could be transferred, repeated, and amplified through mechanical means. For the first time in history, the idea began to take hold that energy itself could be harnessed and directed in ways that were not limited by human endurance. This was not yet fully realized, but the foundation had been laid. As this transformation gathered momentum, its effects became increasingly visible. Output began to rise, not gradually, but in noticeable leaps. Goods that were once scarce started to become more accessible. The relationship between effort and production was changing, and with it, the expectations of what was possible. What had once been seen as fixed limits were now being challenged, and in some cases, quietly overcome. This was the moment where the old world began to loosen its grip. The traditions of manual labor, the reliance on individual skill, the slow and steady pace of production, all of these were still present, but they were no longer dominant. A new system was emerging, one that valued efficiency, scale, and consistency over tradition and craftsmanship. It did not replace the old world overnight, but it began to reshape it from within. What makes this turning point so powerful is how easily it could have been overlooked. There was no single invention that defined it, no single moment that marked its arrival. It was a gradual shift built on countless small changes that, together, altered the direction of human progress. For the first time in history, production was no longer bound entirely by the limits of the human body. It was beginning to move towards something far more expansive, and in that quiet transition, the foundations of a new era were set. Humanity had taken its first steps away from a world defined by effort and into one defined by systems. The shift from manual labor to machines had begun not as a sudden break, but as a steady, irreversible movement. It was the turning point where possibility expanded, where limits began to fade, and where the relationship between humans and their work was fundamentally redefined. Revolutions do not emerge from invention alone. They take hold when the world around them is ready to change. By the mid-18th century, the conditions had aligned in a way that made transformation not only possible, but inevitable. What had once been a collection of isolated improvements began to accelerate, supported by a set of forces that quietly reinforced one another. For the first time in history, progress was no longer dependent on a single breakthrough. It was sustained by an entire environment that encouraged it to grow, spread, and endure. At the center of this shift was a fundamental change in how societies produced and sustained themselves. Agricultural practices had gradually become more efficient, allowing more food to be grown with fewer hands. This was not a sudden change, but a steady refinement: better tools, improved techniques, and a more organized use of land. The result was subtle but powerful. A growing number of people were no longer tied to the land for survival. For the first time in history, a significant portion of the population became available for other forms of work, creating a new and flexible labor force ready to move where opportunity emerged. This movement of people was supported by a second critical force: stability. In regions where laws protected property and agreements could be enforced, individuals were more willing to invest their time and resources into new ideas. Risk, which had always been a barrier to innovation, began to feel more manageable. Entrepreneurs could experiment, form partnerships, and expand their operations with a level of confidence that had rarely existed before. For the first time in history, the framework of society itself began to encourage growth rather than simply preserve tradition. Geography also played a quiet but decisive role. Access to natural resources, particularly those that could be used as sources of energy, created opportunities that extended beyond the limits of human and animal power. Areas rich in such resources became centers of activity, not by chance, but because they offered a foundation upon which new systems could be built. Transportation routes, rivers, coastlines, and eventually more structured networks allowed materials and goods to move with greater ease. This reduced isolation and began to connect regions in ways that had previously been difficult to sustain. At the same time, a cultural shift was taking place, one that valued curiosity and experimentation. Ideas were no longer confined to tradition. They were tested, debated, and refined. Knowledge began to circulate more freely, creating an environment where innovation could build upon itself. For the first time in history, progress became cumulative, with each discovery adding to a growing body of understanding that others could expand upon. This created a momentum that was difficult to slow and even harder to reverse. Economic conditions added another layer to this transformation. The balance between the cost of labor and the availability of alternative resources created a powerful incentive to seek more efficient methods of production. When it became more expensive to rely solely on human effort, the appeal of machines grew stronger. This was not driven by a desire for change alone, but by necessity. For the first time in history, efficiency became a driving force, pushing individuals and businesses to adopt new methods not just because they could, but because they had to. These forces did not operate in isolation. They interacted, reinforced, and amplified one another in ways that created a self-sustaining cycle. A larger workforce supported expanding production, which increased demand for resources, which in turn encouraged further innovation. Stability allowed these changes to persist, while access to materials and knowledge ensured they could continue to evolve. What had once been a slow and uncertain process of development began to accelerate, gaining a momentum that reshaped entire regions. As this momentum built, the transformation became increasingly visible. Production began to concentrate, systems became more organized, and the scale of activity expanded beyond what had once seemed possible. The old world, defined by scattered effort and limited output, started to give way to something more interconnected and dynamic. For the first time in history, the idea of sustained growth began to take root, not as an exception, but as an expectation. What made this period so significant was not just the presence of these forces, but the way they aligned at a single moment in time. Each factor, agriculture, stability, resources, culture, and economics, had existed in some form before, but rarely had they converged in a way that allowed them to reinforce one another so completely. This alignment created a tipping point, a moment where change could move beyond isolated instances and begin to reshape entire systems. The transformation was not uniform, nor was it without resistance. Different regions experienced it at different paces, influenced by their own unique conditions. Yet where these forces were strongest, the shift was undeniable. New methods spread, old practices adapted or faded, and the balance between tradition and innovation began to shift. For the first time in history, change itself became a defining characteristic of society. In this environment, the transition from manual labor to mechanized production was no longer an isolated phenomenon. It became part of a broader movement, supported by conditions that allowed it to expand and take hold. What had begun as a series of practical solutions evolved into a system capable of sustaining continuous advancement. The limits that had once constrained growth were still present, but they were being challenged from multiple directions at once. This was the moment when transformation became irreversible, not because of a single invention or decision, but because the world had changed in a way that made returning to the old system increasingly unlikely. The forces at work had created a new foundation, one that could support further innovation and expansion. For the first time in history, humanity was not just adapting to change, it was creating the conditions for change to thrive. And within that convergence of forces, a new pattern of progress emerged. It was no longer slow, isolated, or uncertain. It was continuous, interconnected, and driven by a set of conditions that encouraged it to grow. The transformation had taken hold, not as a fleeting moment, but as a lasting shift in how societies functioned, produced, and imagined their future. At first, the changes were subtle, barely noticeable shifts in how work was done, how goods were produced, and how people organized their daily lives. But as machines began to take a more central role, those small adjustments started to ripple outward, touching every part of society. What had once been a world shaped by steady routines and familiar patterns began to transform into something faster, denser, and far more interconnected. For the first time in history, human activity was no longer defined primarily by effort, but by systems that could operate beyond the limits of individual strength. In industry, the most immediate change was scale. Production was no longer confined to small workshops or individual homes. Instead, it began to concentrate in larger spaces where machines could be used more efficiently. These environments brought together workers, tools, and processes in a way that allowed output to increase dramatically. Tasks that had once been completed step by step by a single person were now divided, organized, and repeated across multiple workers and machines. This shift introduced a new rhythm, one that was structured, continuous, and far less dependent on individual pace. With this new rhythm came a new kind of discipline. Work was no longer guided by natural cycles, but by schedules that demanded consistency and precision. Time itself became something to be measured, controlled, and optimized. Hours were fixed, expectations were defined, and the pace of activity was often set not by human preference, but by the operation of machines. For the first time in history, the relationship between people and their work began to change in a fundamental way. Workers were no longer simply producing goods. They were maintaining processes. This transformation extended beyond the workplace and into the structure of society itself. As production concentrated in specific locations, people began to move. Rural areas, once the center of daily life, started to lose population as individuals sought opportunities in places where work was more readily available. Towns grew into cities, and cities expanded at a pace that had rarely been seen before. The landscape changed, not gradually, but in visible and sometimes overwhelming ways. Streets became more crowded, buildings rose closer together, and the quiet spacing of the countryside gave way to the density of urban life. These growing urban centers created new possibilities, but they also introduced new challenges. Housing struggled to keep up with the influx of people, leading to overcrowded living conditions. Infrastructure, which had once been sufficient for smaller populations, was stretched beyond its limits. Access to clean water, proper sanitation, and basic services became inconsistent, shaping daily life in ways that were often difficult and uncertain. For the first time in history, large populations were living in close proximity, under conditions that required entirely new systems of organization and management. Daily routines were also transformed. In the pre-industrial world, work and home life were closely intertwined. Production often took place within or near the home, allowing for a degree of flexibility in how time was managed. With the rise of centralized production, this connection began to break. People traveled to places of work, spent long hours in structured environments, and returned home at the end of the day. This separation created a new pattern of life, one where personal time and working time became more clearly defined, but also more rigid. The nature of work itself began to change as well. Skills that had once been highly valued, developed over years of practice, were no longer the only path to productivity. Machines reduced the need for certain types of expertise, allowing tasks to be performed with less training but greater consistency. This did not eliminate skill entirely, but it shifted its importance. For the first time in history, efficiency began to outweigh craftsmanship as the primary measure of value in many areas of production. At the same time, new roles began to emerge. As systems became more complex, there was a growing need for individuals who could manage, coordinate, and maintain them. This led to the development of positions that had not previously existed. People who oversaw operations, organized labor, and ensured that processes continued to function smoothly. Society itself began to diversify, with new layers forming between those who owned, managed, and worked within these evolving systems. The impact of these changes could also be seen in the availability of goods. As production increased, items that had once been rare or expensive started to become more accessible. This did not happen uniformly, but it marked the beginning of a shift where more people could obtain goods that had previously been out of reach. For the first time in history, the idea of widespread access to manufactured products began to take shape, altering expectations about what daily life could include. Yet alongside these advancements came a growing awareness of their consequences. The concentration of activity in certain areas led to environmental changes that were difficult to ignore. Air and water, once relatively untouched, began to show the effects of increased production. The pace of life, while more efficient, also became more demanding. Long hours, repetitive tasks, and structured environments created new pressures that had not existed in the same form before. For the first time in history, progress itself carried visible trade-offs that affected both individuals and communities. As these changes unfolded, they did not simply replace the old ways of living. They redefined them. Traditions adapted, social structures shifted, and expectations evolved. The familiar patterns of the past did not disappear overnight, but they were increasingly shaped by the presence of new systems that operated on entirely different principles. The balance between independence and coordination, between flexibility and structure, began to move in a new direction. What makes this period so significant is how deeply it reshaped human activity at every level. Industry became more organized and expansive, society became more concentrated and complex, and daily life became more structured and interconnected. For the first time in history, the pace of change itself became a defining feature of existence. People were no longer simply living within established systems. They were adapting to systems that were constantly evolving. And within this transformation, a new way of life emerged, one that was faster, more coordinated, and more dependent on the continuous operation of machines and processes. It was not a simple improvement or a gradual adjustment, but a fundamental shift in how humans worked, lived, and interacted with the world around them. The presence of machines had moved beyond isolated tasks and become a central force, reshaping not just production, but the very structure of society and the experience of daily life. There are transformations in history that end when their immediate goals are achieved, and then there are those that continue to echo long after their origins have faded. What began as a shift in how goods were produced did not remain confined to factories or workshops. It expanded outward, reshaping the structure of societies and redefining the expectations of human life itself. For the first time in history, change did not simply alter the present. It established a new direction for the future, one that continues to shape the world we inhabit today. At its core, this transformation introduced a new relationship between humanity and progress. Before this moment, advancement had been gradual, often measured across generations, with little sense of acceleration. But as systems of production became more efficient and interconnected, growth began to compound. Each improvement built upon the last, creating a cycle where progress fed into itself. For the first time in history, the idea of continuous sustained development became not just possible, but expected. This changed how societies planned, how economies expanded, and how individuals understood their place within a larger system. One of the most visible legacies of this shift is the structure of the modern economy. Production is no longer limited by local resources or individual effort. It operates on a scale that connects regions, nations, and entire continents. Goods move across vast distances, coordinated through networks that rely on precision and timing. Markets have expanded beyond what would have once been imaginable, creating a level of interdependence that defines the modern world. For the first time in history, economic activity became global in both reach and impact. This expansion also reshaped social structures in lasting ways. A broader range of roles and opportunities emerged, allowing individuals to participate in society through various forms of work beyond traditional labor. New professions developed, new skills became valuable, and new pathways for advancement appeared. The idea that a person's position could change over time through education, effort, or innovation gained greater significance. While inequalities persisted, the framework of society itself became more dynamic, offering possibilities that had not previously existed in such a visible form. At the same time, the transformation introduced a new pace of life. The steady, predictable rhythms that once guided daily activity were replaced by systems that operated continuously, often without pause. Time became something to be managed with increasing precision, influencing everything from work schedules to transportation and communication. For the first time in history, the expectation emerged that processes could operate around the clock, creating a world where activity was no longer limited by natural cycles. This shift did not simply increase efficiency. It redefined how people experience time itself. The influence of this transformation can also be seen in the environment that surrounds us. Cities, once relatively small and scattered, have grown into vast centers of activity, shaped by the need to support large populations and complex systems. Infrastructure, roads, networks, and systems of distribution has expanded to connect these spaces, creating a landscape that reflects the demands of modern life. For the first time in history, the physical world began to mirror the scale and intensity of human activity, transforming not only how people lived, but where they lived. Yet alongside these advancements, there's a parallel legacy that continues to shape modern discussions. The systems that enabled rapid growth also introduced challenges that remain unresolved. The concentration of activity, the demand for resources, and the pace of production have all placed pressures on the environment and on societies themselves. Questions about sustainability, balance, and long-term impact have become central to understanding the world we have inherited. For the first time in history, progress is not viewed solely as an achievement, but as a responsibility that must be managed. This dual nature of advancement and consequence is perhaps the most defining feature of this transformation. It created a world of unprecedented capability, where technology and systems allow for levels of productivity and connection that would have once seemed impossible. At the same time, it introduced complexities that require constant adaptation and reflection. The balance between growth and stability, between innovation and preservation, has become a central challenge of modern life. What makes this legacy so enduring is how deeply it is embedded in everyday experience. From the way goods are produced and distributed to the way people communicate and organize their time, the influence of this transformation is present in nearly every aspect of life. It is not something that can be easily separated from the present, because it has become part of the foundation upon which the present is built. For the first time in history, a single period of change has continued to shape multiple generations in such a direct and lasting way. As we look at the modern world, it becomes clear that this was not simply a shift in technology or production, but a redefinition of what it means to live in a society that is constantly evolving. The expectations of growth, the reliance on systems, and the interconnected nature of global activity all trace back to this moment of transformation. It established patterns that continue to guide decision-making, influence innovation, and shape the direction of future development. And yet, perhaps the most profound impact lies in how it changed human perception. It introduced the idea that limits can be challenged, that systems can be improved, and that the world itself can be reshaped through deliberate effort. For the first time in history, humanity began to see progress not as a distant possibility, but as an ongoing process, one that could be guided, accelerated, and expanded. This is the world that emerged from that initial shift, a world defined by movement, connection, and constant change. It is a world of extraordinary capability, but also one that carries the weight of its own complexity. The transformation did not end when its first phase was complete. It became a continuous force, shaping not only how societies function, but how they imagine their future. And in that sense, its legacy is not confined to the past. It lives on in every system we rely on, every city we inhabit, and every expectation we hold about what tomorrow might bring.